After parting, they are back again. Will they get their happy ending this time? I should have seen it coming. The smirk that slipped across his face that night, the way his words cut through me like glass. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the confirmation of every doubt I'd tried to bury. And the worst part, he didn't even flinch when the truth spilled out. That moment watching the mask fall from someone I once loved, it was like standing in front of a fire, knowing you were the one who handed over the match. But this story isn't just about a broken heart. No, it's about the kind of betrayal that doesn't just hit you once, it echoes. Through family, through loyalty, through the people who were supposed to protect you, not twist the knife deeper. So here's the question I kept circling back to. If someone already shattered you once, would you ever trust them again? Would you take them back into your life, smiling like nothing happened? Or would you shut the door before they could even speak? Because fate doesn't always give you the choice. Sometimes, it drags the past straight to your doorstep, daring you to decide whether you'll crumble again or stand your ground. When I saw him after all those years, it felt like the universe had played a cruel joke. Older, smoother, carrying that same easy charm that once disarmed me completely. For a moment, I almost let myself believe in it again. Almost. But here's what no one tells you. The past doesn't vanish just because you're older. The scars don't fade simply because you've convinced yourself you've healed. All it takes is one look, one smile, one careless touch, and suddenly you're back in the wreckage you swore you'd never return to. This story isn't about a second chance at love. It's about what happens when someone who once ruined you comes waltzing back into your world, acting like the past was nothing more than a bad dream. And it's about the choice you make when you realize they're not just dangerous to your heart. They're dangerous to everything you hold dear. So buckle up. Because this isn't a love story, it's a reckoning. And if you love tales where justice isn't just served, it's chilled, plated, and delivered with a side of poetic irony, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. These scripts take hours of digging through details, writing until my fingers ache, and surviving secondhand heartbreak just to bring you these stories. Your support, it keeps the fire burning. Now, let me take you back to the night it all began. My name's Maya, and if you'd met me a few years back, you probably wouldn't have noticed me. I was the quiet one, the one who laughed softly, apologized too much, and stayed small just to keep the peace. But back then, I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I'd found the kind of love people write novels about. His name was Ethan, my first great love, my whole world in one reckless, crooked smile. We planned everything, late night futures whispered in the dark, promises of forever scribbled between coffee cups and train rides. And then one day, he was gone. No fight, no goodbye, no explanation, just silence where his voice used to be. It felt like the ground had swallowed me whole. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, and all I was left with was a hollow question. What did I do wrong? But here's the thing about heartbreak. It doesn't kill you. It hardens you. I threw myself into work, clawed my way up in my career, built walls so high I thought nothing could touch me again. I convinced myself I'd moved on, that Ethan was nothing but a chapter I'd long since closed, until the night the universe decided to laugh in my face. It was at a friend's party. Nothing fancy, just a cozy get-together, music low, the kind of evening where you expect awkward small talk and too many chips on the counter. I was halfway through a story about my disastrous commute when I heard his laugh. God, that laugh. It froze me mid-sentence, pulled me straight back into the past like I'd never left. I turned, and there he was, Ethan, older, sharper somehow, but still wearing that same disarming charm that once made me forget every red flag waving in my face. He saw me, too, and the look in his eyes. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition, like he'd been waiting for this moment, certain it would come. Wow, he said, crossing the room like the years between us didn't exist. Maya, you look incredible. And I hated how my stomach flipped at the sound of my name on his lips. I hated that after all this time, some part of me still remembered how it felt to be his. We talked, stilted at first, like strangers fumbling for common ground. But then it slipped into something easier, almost familiar. He asked about my job, my family, the places I'd traveled. And for a moment, I could almost pretend the years of silence hadn't happened. Almost. But under it all was a hum of unease. Because no matter how charming he was, no matter how steady his gaze felt, I couldn't forget the truth. This man had once walked out of my life without a word. And yet, I felt that old pull. The same magnet that had drawn me to him years ago was still there, tugging at me, daring me to believe in him again. I remember excusing myself, stepping outside into the cool night air just to breathe. My hands shook, my heart raced, and in my head, one relentless question echoed. Asterisk, if someone broke your heart once, would you ever trust them again? Asterisk, because the truth was, I didn't know. Some scars never heal the way you want them to. And seeing Ethan again made me realize I wasn't as untouchable as I'd convinced myself to be. That night, as I left the party, I caught him watching me from across the room. That smile of his tugged at the corner of his mouth, like he already knew the ending to a story I hadn't even agreed to write again. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of it. Not even close. If your ex came back years later, would you give them another chance or walk away without looking back? For weeks after that night, I told myself I wouldn't get pulled back in. I'd learned my lesson the hard way. Once was enough, but Ethan, he was good. Too good. He showed up with apologies I never thought I'd hear. He admitted the mistakes, the immaturity, the selfishness that drove him to leave. He didn't dodge it this time, didn't pretend it was something else. And I'll admit, hearing him say, asterisk, I was a coward, Maya, I shouldn't have walked away like that, asterisk, cracked something in me I thought had turned to stone. He swore he'd grown, said the years apart had taught him what really mattered, that he wouldn't waste another chance. And for the first time, I wanted to believe him. So, slowly, I let the walls down. Not all at once, piece by piece. Coffee dates, long walks, the kind of conversations where time slipped without me noticing. And sometimes, just sometimes, it felt like nothing had ever broken between us. Like the good parts of who we used to be were still alive, waiting to be rediscovered. He remembered little things, too. How I took my tea, the exact shade of blue I'd painted my kitchen years back. Even the song I used to hum when I was nervous. And for a moment, I thought asterisk, maybe people really do change. But cracks. They always show, sooner or later. It started small. A vague excuse about why he couldn't meet one evening. A text that came hours late, brushed off with asterisk, sorry. Long day. Asterisk, his phone buzzing face down on the table, and him silencing it without a glance. One night, I asked a simple question. So, who keeps calling you this late? His eyes flickered just for a second before he forced a smile. Work stuff. Nothing you need to worrying about. Work stuff. At 11 p.m. on a Sunday. I laughed it off, but inside, my stomach tightened. That old, familiar unease. The feeling grew. Vague answers, disappearing acts, promises to call that somehow slipped his mind, and every time I pressed, he turned it around. Maya, you've got to stop thinking I'm the same guy I used to be. Don't punish me for the past. And that line? That one nearly got me, because wasn't I supposed to give people second chances? Didn't I owe it to myself to at least try? But I wasn't the same girl I was back then, either. I noticed things now. Things I used to excuse away. My friends noticed over wine one night. I told them about Ethan being back. Half of them groaned. The other half just looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Don't do this, Maya, one of them said flatly. Men like that don't change. They just get better at lying. I wanted to defend him. I really did. I wanted to say you don't know him like I do. But the truth was they knew exactly the kind of man he'd been. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't wrong. Still, I couldn't walk away. Not yet. Not without knowing for sure. Because hope is a stubborn thing, and part of me was clinging to the memory of who I thought he could be. So I stayed, watching, listening, feeling that gut twist every time his phone lit up in the dark. And if you've ever been in that place where love and suspicion collide, you know how heavy it feels. Like standing in a room full of smoke, waiting to see if there's really a fire. Deep down, I knew the answer. I just needed proof. Because if Ethan was still the same man who once vanished without warning, then letting him back in wasn't just a mistake, it was handing him the knife to cut me open all over again. Would you trust someone who hurt you deeply once before? Or is once already too many times? The cracks didn't just appear, they widened. Quietly at first, then all at once. Ethan started missing dinners. At first, it was work. Always work. Late meetings, sudden calls. Just one more deadline. I tried to be understanding. I'd built my own life around long hours once too. But his excuses became patterns, and patterns became habits. The phone calls were worse. His screen would light up, name hidden, and he'd step outside to answer in a low voice. 10 minutes, 20, sometimes longer. And when he came back, he'd plaster on that easy smile as if it could erase the tension from the room. I told myself not to overthink. Old scars can make you paranoid, right? But paranoia doesn't invent lipstick smudged on a coffee cup that isn't yours. The moment it all clicked came on an ordinary Tuesday. He'd left his car at my place, and I offered to drive us out for dinner. Sliding into the driver's seat, I reached for the glove compartment just to grab napkins. That's when I saw it. A scarf. Silky, floral, and definitely not mine. I froze. My breath hitched as my fingers brushed the fabric. The scent clung to it, perfume. Sweet, expensive, and unfamiliar. I sat there staring, my mind running in circles. Was I supposed to believe this? Just appeared asterisk. When Ethan slipped into the passenger seat, I held it up. Lose something? For a fraction of a second, his expression faltered. Then he laughed. Too quickly. Oh, that must have been my sister's. She was in the car last week. Really? His sister? The same sister who lived 3 states away and hadn't visited in months. I didn't say anything. Just nodded, lips pressed tight. But inside, the storm had already begun. From that moment on, every detail screamed louder. The late replies, the secretive smiles, the phone that never left his pocket. Even the way he touched me, less certain, less present, like a man with his body in one place and his heart somewhere else entirely. One night, I finally pushed, Ethan, is there something you're not telling me? He didn't even hesitate. You're imagining things, Maya. You're letting the past poison us. His words were calm, but his eyes defensive. Sharp betrayed him. And that's when I understood. He wasn't just dismissing my fears. He was protecting a lie. The realization was ice in my veins. I felt it settle in my chest, heavy and suffocating. Here was the man who swore he'd changed, swore he'd grown, and yet the story was the same. Different details, same ending. I wish I could tell you I confronted him right then and there, slammed the truth down and demanded answers. But I didn't. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't the same girl who once begged him to stay. This time, I wanted more than the truth. I wanted proof. Because deep down, I knew. He wasn't just back in my life to love me. He was back to destroy me all over again. Be honest, would you confront him right then, or start quietly gathering proof? I didn't scream. I didn't throw him out. Not this time. Instead, I smiled. I played along. And in that silence, something shifted. I wasn't the one on trial anymore. He was. Every lie, every late reply, every excuse, I started treating them like puzzle pieces, quietly collecting them, fitting them together, building a picture he thought I'd never see. It began small. A screenshot of a text that didn't sit right. A meeting that magically lined up with his sudden weekend out of town. A social media tag that disappeared an hour later. I didn't need to dig too deep. The cracks spilled evidence faster than I could gather it. Mutual friends started whispering, too. Not everyone loved Ethan's charm. Some people had seen him where he shouldn't have been, with women who weren't me. I listened. I nodded. I didn't let on. The more I learned, the clearer it became. Ethan hadn't changed at all. He was still the same boy who'd vanished years ago, running from one thrill to the next, juggling hearts like fragile glass balls. Except now, he'd grown cockier, careless, convinced no one would ever catch him. But I was catching him. One screenshot, one receipt, one overheard conversation at a time. I remember the moment it stopped being about heartbreak. I was staring at his call log. Yes, I'd seen it and realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was a pattern. He wasn't stumbling into mistakes. He was orchestrating them, crafting them, breaking people for sport. That's when the anger cooled into something sharper. This wasn't about crying on the bathroom floor anymore. This was about making sure Ethan never held that kind of power again. Not over me. Not over anyone. So I started planning. Slowly, coldly. He thought I was slipping back into love, leaning on him again. In reality, I was building a case. My face softened in his presence, but my mind was steel. Every sweet word he whispered was catalogued. Every careless lie was noted. Sometimes he'd smile at me across the table, and I'd smile back while knowing his phone buzzed in his pocket with someone else's name. The duality was almost funny. Almost. The hardest part. Pretending I didn't know. Pretending I was still the girl willing to forgive. He underestimated me because of that silence. And I let him. Hey, you okay? He asked one night, catching me lost in thought. Yeah, I said softly. Just tired. He kissed my forehead and went back to his phone. I almost laughed. Here's the thing, when you've been broken once, the second time doesn't hurt the same way. It burns differently. Less like fire, more like acid. It doesn't consume you. It corrodes you slowly, until all that's left is resolve. And that's what I had. Resolve. I knew I couldn't just end it with another tearful goodbye. That would be mercy. And Ethan thrived on mercy. Women walked away, he licked his wounds, and then he started over. No, He needed something else. Something that would finally take the mask off. So I waited. I gathered. I planned. Every night, lying next to him, I rehearsed in my head. Not a screaming match, not a scene. Something cleaner, sharper. Something that would strip him of control the way he once stripped me of trust. I became a silent watcher in my own story, letting him dig his own grave, step by step, lie by lie. And here's the twist: he had no idea. He thought he was still playing me, still pulling the same old strings, but this time, the puppet had cut the cords. What's the smartest revenge you've ever seen someone pull off? Because trust me, mine was only just beginning. The funny thing about liars is that they never expect their audience to start keeping score. By the time I set my plan in motion, I wasn't running on heartbreak anymore. I was running on calculation. Every move had to be small, deliberate, like tugging a single thread until the whole sweater unraveled. So I started simple. Gentle nudges. A comment here, a question there. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Just enough. When a mutual friend casually mentioned Ethan had been working late, I tilted my head and smiled. Oh, that's strange. He told me he was out of town that night. I didn't accuse. I didn't push. I just let the silence do the work. People notice silence more than shouting. The first domino tipped. Soon, little inconsistencies started surfacing. His stories didn't line up, not with me, not with anyone else. And once people start looking for cracks, they see them everywhere. I never had to expose him outright. I just opened the door and let the truth walk in on its own. One night at dinner, a friend asked him, point blank, "So, Ethan, how's that project in Chicago going?" He blinked. What project? The table went still. I sipped my wine, eyes lowered, pretending not to notice. That's how his mask began to slip, not in private, where he could hide, but in public, where every stumble echoed. The whispers grew. Friends who once praised his charm now traded side glances. And then came the cracks in his other relationships. The scarf in his car hadn't been the only secret. He'd been juggling more than just me, and juggling always ends the same way. I never confronted the other woman directly. I didn't need to. People talk when they've been burned, and Ethan had been careless. Late-night texts, overlapping promises, photos that didn't add up. She pieced it together almost as quickly as I did. The fallout was almost poetic. While Ethan scrambled to maintain his stories, his own carelessness tore them down. The text contradicted the phone calls. The lies contradicted each other. And his silence when he couldn't think fast enough was the loudest of all. The best part. I stayed calm. Always calm. Even when he tried to shift the blame. "You're being distant, Maya," he accused one night, voice sharp. I met his eyes, steady. "Am I, or are you just noticing what you've been ignoring?" He didn't know how to answer that. Control had always been his game. He thrived on the chaos, the tears, the drama. But I wasn't giving him that this time. No raised voices. No breakdowns. Just composure. And nothing rattles a manipulator more than someone who refuses to play by their rules. Day by day, Ethan's house of cards folded in on itself. His friends stopped defending him. His relationships collided. His polished reputation, the one he'd built on half-truths and smooth words, began to crumble. And me? I stayed exactly where I was, watching, waiting. It wasn't about revenge that screamed, it was about revenge that whispered. Revenge that smiled politely while the ground gave way beneath his feet. The man who once left me shattered was now unraveling in front of everyone. Not because I exposed him, but because I gave him the tiniest push and let gravity handle the rest. And trust me, he hadn't even hit the floor yet. When liars run out of moves, they always reach for the oldest trick in the book, words. After weeks of unraveling, Ethan finally did what I'd been waiting for. He sent me a letter. Not a short apology, not a single line of regret, but a long, desperate manifesto. Pages filled with half-truths, excuses, and the kind of performative sorrow only a man cornered could produce. He started with guilt. Maya, I know I've hurt you more than once, but you have to understand I was lost, I was broken, I didn't know how to love you the way you deserved. Then came the revisionist history. Suddenly, all those nights he disappeared weren't betrayals, they were moments of confusion. The lies? According to him, they weren't lies at all, just misunderstandings. But the piece de resistance was the plea. Give me one more chance. I can be better. I promise I'll prove it. Reading it, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I knew exactly what he was doing. Manipulation dressed up as vulnerability. He thought a few carefully chosen words could erase years of scars. And maybe the old me would have fallen for it. The Maya who once believed love was stronger than betrayal. But not anymore. I folded the letter, tucked it back in the envelope, and set it on my desk. No reply, no angry paragraphs, not even a single word, because silence. Silence was my answer, and silence is louder than any speech he could have prepared. 4 days, I know he waited, checking his phone, refreshing his inbox, telling himself I'd cave, that I'd break the silence like I always used to, but I didn't. Because here's the truth, sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. That letter wasn't closure. It wasn't healing. It was just proof that he finally saw what I had become. Someone he couldn't manipulate anymore. Someone who no longer needed his words, his excuses, or his empty promises. The silence was my victory. Not explosive, not messy, but absolute. And as the days stretched into weeks with no reply, I imagine he realized something he'd never admit out loud. He hadn't just lost me again. This time, he'd lost me forever. If someone who betrayed you wrote a letter begging for forgiveness, would you answer? Or would silence be the only reply they deserve? Time has a way of revealing the truth, even when you don't go digging for it. Ethan's shiny facade didn't just crack, it crumbled. One by one, the people who once defended him began to distance themselves. Friends stopped returning his calls. Invitations dried up. Even his colleagues, the ones who used to praise his charm, whispered about inconsistencies too obvious to ignore. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. His downfall was quiet, almost anticlimactic, like watching a balloon slowly deflate until there's nothing left but shriveled rubber. And for the first time in years, I wasn't part of the wreckage. While his world grew smaller, mine expanded. I poured myself into work, not as an escape this time, but as a choice. Projects that once felt overwhelming became opportunities I actually wanted to chase. I started saying yes to things I used to shy away from: travel, new friendships, moments that weren't tied to anyone else's approval. And the strangest part, peace, genuine, uncheckable peace. I didn't stalk his social media. I didn't wait for updates through mutual friends. I didn't need to. His life and mine had finally taken separate roads, and for once, I was glad we weren't walking together. People sometimes asked, "Don't you feel vindicated, seeing him fall apart like that?" And I'd smile, because the truth is, vindication wasn't the point. It never was. Yes, revenge had its thrill. Watching his lies collapse was satisfying in ways I can't deny. But true closure didn't come from his suffering. It came the moment I chose myself. The moment I stopped measuring my worth through the lens of someone who never valued me. Because here's the thing, forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, or pretending the hurt didn't happen. Forgiveness is refusing to let the hurt define who you are. And that's what I finally understood. I forgave him not by welcoming him back, but by walking away for good. I forgave myself too, for the years I spent waiting, hoping, believing. That version of me, the girl who clung to empty promises, deserved compassion, not blame. In the end, Ethan's collapse wasn't my victory. My victory was the quiet strength I found in choosing peace over chaos, dignity over drama. Would I ever trust him again? No. But I also didn't need to carry him anymore. He was a chapter I'd read, reread, and finally closed. The story wasn't about him. It was about me. About becoming someone who didn't need revenge to feel whole. Someone who could look back at all the scars and finally see strength, not damage. And if you're wondering whether he ever tried again, of course he did. People like Ethan always circle back. But by then, his words didn't sting, his presence didn't shake me. He was just another reminder of who I'd outgrown. So if you've ever been broken by someone, here's what I'll say. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the pain never happened. Healing is when the pain stops controlling you. And that's where I found myself standing in a life I built, stronger than ever, free from the weight of his shadow. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't watching him lose everything. It was realizing I never needed him to win. Do you think real closure comes from forgiveness or from watching karma do its work? I'd love to hear your take. For the longest time, I thought revenge would be the grand finale, the ultimate closure. And yes, watching Ethan's lies unravel had its sting of satisfaction. But here's the truth I didn't see at first. Getting him back wasn't my happy ending. My real ending was freedom. Freedom from his half-truths, his shifting stories, the gaslighting that kept me doubting myself. Freedom from waiting for someone who was never going to show up for me. And maybe most importantly, freedom from the version of myself who once thought she didn't deserve better. That realization didn't come in a dramatic flash. It arrived quietly, like sunlight sneaking through the curtains after a storm. One morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about him in days. Not his face, not his words, not the wreckage he left behind. And that silence. That was peace. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, it rarely does. But it became mine. Entirely mine. I started building new routines, not to fill the gaps he left, but to create spaces that reflected me. Long walks without checking my phone. Coffee shops where nobody knew my history. Even laughter, the real kind, not the forced smile I used to wear, found its way back. And when new people entered my life, I met them differently. Not with desperation, not with fear, but with curiosity. Healthy connections, built on mutual respect, not survival. For the first time, love wasn't about clinging. It was about choosing. I know some would have wanted me to end up in another whirlwind romance, to prove I was okay by moving on quickly. But this wasn't about proving anything. This was about finally understanding that being whole had nothing to do with who stood beside me. The scars Ethan left, they didn't vanish, but they stopped burning. They became reminders of a woman who walked through fire and didn't let it consume her. And I'll admit, there were moments of temptation, times I wondered, what if he really changed? What if he came back different? But here's the thing. Real growth isn't about waiting for someone else to transform. It's about choosing not to go back, even when they swear they're new. Because sometimes the happy ending isn't the one where you get them back. It's the one where you never take them back at all. That's where my story ended, not with bitterness, not with revenge, but with dignity. With strength I didn't know I had, and a life that finally belonged to me. Would I rewrite the past if I could? Maybe, maybe not. Because without the pain, I wouldn't have found this clarity. Without the scars, I wouldn't know the weight of freedom. So no, Ethan wasn't my ending. He was just the plot twist I had to outgrow. And me? I was the story all along. What do you think? Does the real happy ending come from moving on, or from getting even? I'd love to hear your thoughts. In the end, Maya didn't just win, she reclaimed herself. She refused to circle back to the same heartbreak, refused to let his empty apologies pull her into the same spiral. This time, she chose differently, stronger, wiser. The sweetest justice wasn't loud or messy. It was quiet, patient, undeniable. Every lie Ethan told eventually caved in on itself, and Maya didn't have to lift a finger beyond those careful nudges. Watching his mask crumble while she stood tall, that was victory. But the real triumph, learning that not every second chance is worth taking. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say nothing, walk away, and never look back, because closure isn't about rewriting the past. It's about refusing to repeat it. And Maya, she walked into her future lighter, freer, unshackled from the weight of someone who never deserved her in the first place. That's not just revenge, that's transformation. So, what do you think? Would you have stayed silent the way Maya did, or gone for the dramatic confrontation? I'd love to hear your take. And if this story gave you chills, don't forget to hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe. It takes hours to sift through stories, craft scripts, and bring these tales to life, and your support helps us keep the drama, justice, and storytelling coming every single week.